The old house at the end of Maple Road had been abandoned for as long as anyone in town could remember. Its windows were cracked, boarded up in some places, and the roof sagged from years of neglect. The yard, once neatly trimmed, was now overgrown with tangled weeds and vines that crept up the rotting wooden walls like nature trying to reclaim what was rightfully hers. For the children of the town, it was a source of endless fascination. They'd heard the stories, the whispered rumors about a girl named Eva who had been chained in the basement, left to die in agony. But those were just ghost stories to them, tales meant to scare them away from the old house. Kids being kids, they didn't believe in the supernatural. What better place to play a game of hide and seek than in a house filled with mystery? It was a warm summer evening when it happened. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the sky was painted in hues of orange and purple. The group of 5, Lily, Jake, Eric, Sarah, and Max, stood in front of the house, their excitement bubbling over into nervous laughter. "Come on, it's just an old house," Jake said, his voice filled with false bravado. "It's perfect for hide and seek. I bet no one's even been inside for years." "Yeah, unless you're scared," Lily teased, nudging Max, who had been unusually quiet since they arrived. Max glanced at the house, a knot forming in his stomach. There was something about the way the house loomed over them, its darkened windows like empty eyes watching them, waiting. But he didn't want to look like a coward in front of his friends. So he forced a grin and shrugged. "I'm not scared. Let's do it." They pushed open the creaky gate and made their way up the overgrown path. The air around the house seemed colder, despite the warm evening. The wooden steps groaned under their weight, and the front door, though heavy and warped from age, swung open with an eerie ease, as if it had been expecting them. The inside of the house was just as they'd imagined, dust-covered furniture, faded wallpaper peeling from the walls, and a thick layer of grime that coated everything. But it wasn't just the neglect that made the air feel heavy, there was something else, something that none of them could put into words. It was as if the house was holding its breath, waiting. Jake was the first to break the uneasy silence. "All right, who's counting?" "I'll count," Sarah volunteered. She stood by the front door, closing her eyes and beginning the countdown. 1, 2, 3. The rest scattered, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Lily darted toward what looked like an old sitting room, hiding behind a dusty armchair. Max and Jake ran up the creaky staircase to the second floor, while Eric found a closet just off the kitchen to hide in. As Sarah counted, the house seemed to shift, the walls groaning and settling, though no one was moving. She reached 10 and called out, "Ready or not, here I come." Sarah began her search, her heart racing more from the thrill of the game than any real fear, at least, that's what she told herself. She found Lily first, tucked behind the armchair, her wide grin covered in dust from the floor. Laughing, they both continued the search together. Upstairs, Max and Jake were still hiding. Max had found a small bedroom and squeezed himself into the narrow space between the bed and the wall, trying to still his breathing. Jake, however, had chosen a more daring spot. He had pushed open the door to what looked like the attic and climbed up, hoping no one would think to search there. As he pulled the attic door shut behind him, a sudden chill swept over him, and for a moment, he thought he heard something. A faint clinking sound, like metal brushing against metal. "Probably just rats," he whispered to himself, his voice shaky. In the basement, where no one dared to hide, the air grew colder still. The darkness down there was thick, almost suffocating, and in the farthest corner, chained to the wall, the remnants of Eva stirred. Her body, long decayed, had left behind only bones, but her spirit, her rage, remained. The chains rattled as she moved, the sound low and ominous. Her eyes, hollow and empty, opened slowly, her head jerking unnaturally to the side as if waking from a long slumber. She had waited for so long. For someone to come, someone to hear her, to see her. And now, they were here. The children. They had entered her prison. Her thin, bony fingers twitched, and with an effort, she began to pull against the chains that had held her for generations. The metal groaned, as if resisting, but with each passing second, the links weakened, rust flaking away. Upstairs, Sarah and Lily were still searching for the others when they heard it, a faint clinking sound, like chains dragging against the floor. They paused, exchanging nervous glances. "Did you hear that?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, it's probably just one of the guys messing around," Sarah replied, though her stomach churned with unease. They followed the sound, creeping down the hallway toward the basement door, which stood slightly ajar. A cold draft seeped through the crack, sending shivers up their spines. "Jake?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling. "Max? Eric?" No answer. The clinking grew louder, closer, and then, without warning, the basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang. They screamed, stumbling back, and for a moment, the house seemed to tremble around them. In the attic, Jake heard the scream and froze. His heart pounded in his chest, and the air felt suddenly too thick, too cold. The darkness in the attic seemed to press in on him, and then, he heard it. The unmistakable sound of chains dragging across the floor below him. His breath hitched, and he backed toward the attic door, fumbling for the handle. But when he pulled, it wouldn't budge. Come on," he muttered, his panic rising. Then, from the corner of the attic, he saw her. A figure, pale and thin, emerging from the shadows, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her eyes, wide, bloodshot, and filled with fury, locked onto him. And behind her, the chains, they dragged behind her like they had a life of their own, twisting and slithering across the floor as she moved. Jake screamed, pounding on the attic door, but there was no escape. The figure moved closer, her mouth opening in a silent scream, her decayed fingers reaching for him. Downstairs, Sarah and Lily heard the scream and bolted, running for the front door. But when they reached it, it too was locked, the knob refusing to turn no matter how hard they pulled. Eric emerged from his hiding spot in the kitchen, his face pale with fear. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted, his voice cracking with terror. Before anyone could answer, the lights in the house flickered, and the temperature dropped sharply. The sound of chains, louder now, more insistent, echoed through the halls. The children huddled together, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as the house seemed to come alive around them. From the basement, the door creaked open slowly, and a cold wind rushed up the stairs. The smell of decay filled the air, and then, they saw her. Eva. Her twisted, decayed body moved slowly, her chains rattling as she dragged them behind her. Her eyes, wide and full of fury, locked onto the children, and she let out a low, guttural moan that reverberated through the walls. They screamed and ran, but no matter where they went, Eva followed, her chains scraping against the floor, growing louder, closer with each passing second. Doors slammed shut in their faces, windows refused to open, and the house itself seemed determined to keep them trapped. One by one, they fell. Eric was the first. He tripped in the hallway, and before he could scramble to his feet, the chains wrapped around his ankle, yanking him back into the darkness. His screams echoed through the house, then abruptly stopped. Lily and Sarah clung to each other, sobbing, as they tried to find a way out. But there was no escape. Eva appeared before them, her mouth open in a silent scream, her eyes blazing with rage. The chains reached out, snaking around their bodies, pulling them into the shadows. Max, who had been hiding in the bedroom upstairs, heard the final scream. He trembled, frozen in place as the air grew still. The sound of chains dragging grew closer, and in the reflection of the cracked mirror before him, he saw her, Eva, standing in the doorway, her chains wrapped around her thin, bony arms. "Please, no," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. But Eva's eyes were cold, unforgiving. The chains shot out, wrapping around him, and Max felt the icy grip of death close around his throat. The house fell silent once more. The next morning, the townsfolk found the house just as it always was, old, decrepit, and untouched. But the children were never seen again. Some say they simply ran away, but others, those who knew the stories of Eva, whispered that the house had claimed them, just as it had claimed her. And if you listen closely, on certain nights, you can still hear the sound of chains rattling in the darkness, as the restless spirit of Eva searches for more souls to drag into her eternal torment.